Everybody, this is Mark Assis.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
So welcome back. We just would like to wait another minute or two to allow the others to connect this webinar. So bear with us. I'll come back to you in 1 or 2 minutes. Thank you. Hello everybody, hello again. We are going to start in a couple of minutes. I would like to speak with you and to update you about the latest inputs before we start the webinar. So my name is Mark Assis. I am the Cybersecurity Business Unit Director for Ingram Micro. I'm very pleased to have this webinar with you. We had already 2 or 3 webinars that were repeated in the past few weeks, more than a month now. The topic of those webinars were until now more sales-oriented, how to sell cybersecurity. And you can find the recording of this webinar available on our webinar page, and you will have it also repeated and the link repeated in our newsletter. Our newsletter first edition is going to be issued this week or beginning of next week. It will be full of news about Ingram Micro cybersecurity initiatives, but also about many white papers that our consultants are developing. I would like also to remind you, for those who do not know, we are present during the GISEC in Dubai next week. We have a booth with almost 10 vendors and all our services and training available to be consulted and hopefully delivered to you. We are having also some events, so please join us on our GISEC booth next week, Sunday, Monday and Tuesday. 21st, 22nd and 23rd of May. And now I would like to hand over the webinar to the team, which means Muawiyah Dibsawi, who is going to speak about GDPR. And afterwards, Praveen is going to speak about the IoT and wearable devices and their security concerns. So I leave you in good hands and enjoy this webinar. Muawiyah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Muawiyah Dibsawi. I'm Senior Consultant in the Cybersecurity team at Ingram Micro. In this part of the presentation, I'll be talking about the new data privacy regulation that the European Union has recently approved and adopted, and I'll provide you with some essential information about that. So the agenda for this part of the webinar, and the first part I'll be talking about the high level about how data is shared and accessed by organization and individual in the era of social media and why we need the data regulations. Then I'll be talking about the GDPR, which is the new data privacy regulation in the EU, including some basic terms and definitions used in the regulations and a brief description of the key principles of the regulation. Next, I'll be talking about how the regulation will impact the organizations and the individuals. For organization in the terms of how do they collect and process data about individuals, and for individuals what kind of rights the new regulations give them about the data collected about them. In the last part, we will be talking about what kind of steps organization needs to take in order to prepare and be compliant with the GDPR requirements, and how Ingram Micro can help you to achieve the compliance. And the last part will be for some questions and answers. Starting with the first part is the overview of privacy climate and concerns. So we live in a world in which the technology is used on a daily basis to view information and share information. Just, okay, I'm just, hold on for a second. Okay, so we live in a world where the technology is really used like on a daily basis to share and view information. As you can see, and you know already, in these days, whenever you post something on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, advertisers are reading those posts and they try to analyze your posts and your emails to decide what kind of products you might be interested in and you want to buy. We share information and pictures all the time, so you might find a photo of your mother or like some old relatives, your grandmother maybe, on Google, uploaded by someone you never know. Our mobile phones are with us all the time, and many of the services and applications we install on mobile phones, they enable the location tracking services, and those information about our location are shared with all kind of companies and service providers and applications. If you're buying online or if you're subscribing to some of the services, for example, if you download an album from Agani application, which is a very famous application these days, you might discover that because you've downloaded the album for one particular artist, you have been automatically subscribed on Facebook to the fans page of that artist. Finally, when you have a vacancy in your organization and you start receiving CVs for candidates for that particular position, the first thing we do these days is go to the internet and start looking up those individuals through LinkedIn, through Facebook, through Twitter, and just to get some background information about those candidates. So why do we need actually like a regulation? As you all know, there are many different social media platforms that we interact and we share information daily with them. You can think about Facebook, you can think about Twitter, LinkedIn. You can think about like your favorite online stores such as Amazon, eBay. Think about the history these kind of sites or social media platforms has about the goods that you purchased and searched for. And then you can think about how do they use this information to create a profile about you. Then, of course, we share like obvious information with different sites and different service providers such as the name, addresses, phone numbers, date of birth, gender, age, passport, credit card, driving license, and etc. So because of the nature of the world we live in, we accept that this is part of the living in this modern world, but that does not mean we shouldn't be concerned about what happened to the data once it's been handed over. So you can see in the picture in front of you, I mean, it's like it looks like a face of a person, but it's all about data. And you can see all types of social platforms and companies, they try to get this information and they try to make sense of it, because eventually it's a money-making thing for them. They can sell this data to advertisers, to manufacturers, and maybe marketing agencies. So with that being said, this is where the data privacy comes into the picture. So generally speaking, data privacy regulations aim to provide transparency about how data is collected, processed, and shared. And it also aims to provide the data owners, meaning the individuals, the owners of these data, some kind of control about on their personal data, how is it used and how is it shared by third party, for the objective of ensuring that this kind of data is handled appropriately. Now that we have spoken about how we share data and the technology we use every day and how companies they perceive our data, let's have some background about the current privacy climate worldwide. So we have seen, like in the past few years, that the privacy has been a major concern worldwide, and we've seen some serious changes and incidents to how the world really think about privacy. So in the recent years, like new privacy laws came in countries like Japan, Brazil, and Turkey. And also the EU, although they have the privacy law since 1995, they have introduced a new privacy law, which is the main topic of this presentation. So this indicates that they have an increased concern about the privacy as well. Also, we all know about the information leaks by Edward Snowden and how those leaks has kind of negative effects on how we perceive privacy and how we used to think about privacy. For example, for those of you who doesn't know what safe harbor, so safe harbor is kind of agreement between EU and US, in which EU countries, they can transfer data to US under the assumption that the US companies, they have the right protections in place. So after the leaks from Snowden, so the safe harbor has been invalidated. Also, because of the leaks of Snowden, the technical giant companies such as Google, Facebook, and others, they started taking the privacy matter very, very seriously. We've also seen some increased awareness among its users about privacy requirements. So I think in the near future you will see like the controls you have in place for privacy might be a key business competitive advantage for you. So like users and customers will prefer to deal with companies or organizations who has better controls and better security controls to deal with the privacy matters. So now let's talk about what's GDPR. So GDPR is a major update to the previous data privacy regulations that were established in the EU in 1995, which is about 22 years from now. this was long before the existence of the cloud and social media was even imagined, let alone the scale of today data sharing. So you can see in the front of you the GDPR stands for General Data Protection Regulation. It's a privacy law that applies to personal data of EU residents. So the main focus of the GDPR is the personal data, which is defined as any information related to an individual, whether they can be identified directly or indirectly through this information. And the objective of the GDPR is to ensure that individuals can control how information about them is used, and also to ensure that organizations holding those information, they have the required measures in place to protect this information from disclosure. The scope in GDPR, which is really something interesting, although it's an EU regulation, it applies globally to any organization or any entity that holds or processes information about EU citizens. And the enforcement mechanism for GDPR, so they had some severe penalties for non-compliance with the GDPR requirements, and you will see this in the upcoming slides. So they have some requirements and obligations that you have to comply with, otherwise you will be suffering from really severe financial fines. And in terms of date, it will be enforced by 25th of May 2018. This is about like 1 year from now. And if you think 1 year is too long, it's really not, because if you think about when you start an IT project and the time it takes for the management to take a decision, and then identification of what kind of consultancy services you want, what kind of technology and training, and what kind of controls you need to have in place, and then going through the procurement and all these kind of like internal processes, 1 year is really not really very long time. So the GDPR is really a big document, I think 200 plus pages of legal language. However, for IT and security individuals who have to implement the GDPR rules, the key parts for them are only a few articles in the regulation. So I think before we dive into the details of GDPR, it's really important that we get some basic vocabulary out of the way. So in GDPR, personal data, as I mentioned in the previous slide, means any information related to an individual, basically a natural person. So in the GDPR, they mention like kind of interchangeably the natural person with the data subject. Okay, so you can see both terms are used. Data subject is usually a natural person who can be identified or identifiable directly or indirectly. You will see also a definition of data controllers. So this is anyone who determines the purpose and means of processing the personal data. In another way of saying, the controller is basically the company or organization that makes all the decisions about initially accepting the data from the data subject. You have also the definition of data processor, which is basically anyone who processes the data for the controller. So the GDPR specifically includes, for example, storage as a processing function. So that takes into account, for example, the cloud-based virtual storage. So now if you put these two definitions together, I mean the data controller and data processor, the GDPR places rules on protecting personal data as it is collected by data controller and passed to the data processor. You have also the DPO, which is Data Protection Officer. Under the GDPR, there are some circumstances when you need to hire a data protection officer, whether like it's in-house employed or an external party. Supervisory authority is the national data protection authority, basically. So you have different supervisory authorities across the EU countries, and those are empowered to enforce the GDPR requirements, and you can report security breaches to them in case this has happened to you. Transfer of data is where you transfer your personal data from an EU country to outside an EU country. So there are some restrictions on this transfer, and when transfer doesn't really mean physical transfer. For example, if you're viewing data through a website that is stored in EU, this is considered a transfer. A process, basically any operation which is performed on the personal data, whether or not by automated means. So basically anything you do on the personal data, whether you collect, you transfer, you process, you analyze, it's considered a process. So some key principles for GDPR. So it has basically 7 principles. The first one is lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. Basically, it means the data collected and processed about individual has to be in a legal manner, you know, and it has to be for fair and transparent purposes. Purpose limitation is where whatever information you collect about the individual, it has to be for a very specific purpose. And you have to state this purpose during the time of collection. And when you collected the information, when you collect the information, the processing of this information should really match the purpose for which initially the information were collected. Data minimization means the data you have collected, you can only keep it as long as the purpose for which you have collected this data is there. So once the purpose is no more there, you don't have to keep the data. The accuracy means, this is really interesting stuff. So if you collected some information about individual, you have to put efforts to make sure this data is accurate and up to date. In case the data is not accurate, data has to be deleted. Storage limitations, as I mentioned previously, is like in case the purpose for collecting the data is not really there anymore, then it has to be deleted actually. So there's an exception here. Personal data may be stored for a longer period for archiving, for example, or for scientific or historical research, or maybe for some statistical purposes. However, there's a restriction on this, so you have to have a proper technical and organizational measures as required by the GDPR in order for you to safeguard the rights and freedom of individuals who own this information. Integrity and confidentiality, as the name suggests, it means the data, the personal data, has to be processed in a manner that ensure appropriate security of the personal data, including protection against like unauthorized processing or accidental loss or destruction. So you need to have appropriate technical and organizational measure in place to ensure the integrity and confidentiality of the information. The last one is the accountability. This is, I think, in the most significant addition for the GDPR from the previous data regulation. Under the GDPR, you are required to show how you comply with the GDPR principles. So you are expected to put into place a comprehensive but proportionate governance measures to show that you are complying with the requirements of GDPR. So with that being said, what does it really mean for organizations? Okay, so organizations, they have to obtain a clear consent before collecting any information from the individual. So it's not only a tick box that we see on most websites saying, do you agree on the terms and conditions? This is not acceptable anymore. So GDPR requires that consent to be clear, and it's no more acceptable to bury this deep in the terms and conditions. So in addition, the consent can be withdrawn if the person no longer wants an organization to use their personal information. This means the data has to be erased. New addition under the regulation is that if you are an individual under 16, so the consent has to be taken by your parents. So you can see the challenge in here. So if you want to collect the data from an individual under 16, so you have to get in touch with his parents. So companies need to really think about how do they re-engineer their processes to address this kind of issue. Provide a copy of individuals' personal data on request. So individuals have the right to ask for their personal data at any time if they want this data to be processed by another entity. So you as an organization, you have to be in a position to provide this information to the individuals or the data subject. Erase all personal records if requested. This is what's called the right to be forgotten. So you as an individual, you have the right under the GDPR to go to an organization that's collecting your information and ask them to erase all your data. Organizations also has to provide adequate security. So there is no really specific details about this. This is kind of general statement. And I'll talk about what kind of frameworks that can help you have a proper security measures in place for the GDPR. Privacy impact assessment is what they call privacy by design. So before deciding on the collection of any information or deciding to pass this information for data processing, you have to do what's called privacy impact assessment, and you have to show some records and documentation that you have done this to the supervisory authorities. This is like you have to see what kind of impact sharing this data will have on the personal data of individuals before you actually share the data with the processing entity. The last but not least is they have introduced the concept of one-stop shop. So basically, it's like a unified regulation across all EU countries. So now you can have only one supervisory authority to deal with, and you have the right as an organization to select your supervisory authority. So you don't have to deal with multiple authorities across the different countries. Only one authority is enough, and you can select that authority. Now, what does it mean to individuals? So the GDPR really gives extra rights to individuals. So they have the right to be informed, so you need to inform the individuals at any case of data collection or processing. And as we mentioned earlier, the information has to be communicated in a clear and concise manner. This is where we go back to the consent. The right of access, individuals, they can request to access and have a copy of their data at any point in time. The right to rectification, in case individuals think that the information you have about them is incorrect, they have the right to ask you to modify this data to make it accurate and up to date. The right to erasure, this is where we say the right to be forgotten, as explained in the previous slide. The right to restrict processing, individuals have the right to object and stop, like if there is like current processing by another entity. So you have collected the data from them and you have sent this data for processing by another entity. They have the right to object and ask you to stop this processing. Data portability goes back again to the right to get a copy of the data and share it with another entity for processing. The right to object, so if they have any doubt about you as an organization, that if they feel you don't have the right controls in place or you don't comply with any of the GDPR requirements, they can object and they can complain to the authorities. They have also some rights in relation to the decision made and profiling about them based on the information. So if they think that you as an organization has made a wrong profiling of them, they have the right to object and they have the right to ask you to modify your decisions and your profiling. So one of the most important things in the regulation is the mandatory breach notification. So in case of a breach, if you are an organization and you have been breached, there are some mandatory requirements to notify the breaches. So this is probably the most, kind of aggressive, I would say, part of the regulation. So before GDPR, only telco and service providers had to report breaches to the authorities within 24 hours. While under GDPR, the data controllers must inform the supervisory authority about the nature of the breach, the categories of the data, and number of data subjects affected, and what kind of measure the data control has had in place or has put in place to mitigate the breach. So as you can see on the screen, you have to notify the supervisory authority within 72 hours of becoming aware of the breach if the breach is likely to affect rights and freedom of individual. In case of a high risk breach that might affect the lives maybe of the individual, you have to notify the individual. So you can imagine if you have a breach that affected massive number of individuals, it's going to be really challenging to inform these individuals. So this really puts a great pressure on organizations to have strong incident management capabilities, because if you think about it, you have to really be able to detect, recover, and communicate whatever security breaches you have within a very limited time, that's 72 hours. So now we will know why in the next slide you have to improve your incident management capabilities. So if you don't comply with the requirements, or if you did not report the breaches in time, there are really severe fines that can be imposed on you. So there are two types of administrative fines. So if you violate any of the GDPR provisions, you could be subject to a fine of up to 20 million euro or up to 4% of your annual global turnover, whichever is higher. If you fail to notify the authorities within 72 hours of the security breach, you might be subject to a fine of 10 million euro or 2% of your annual global turnover, whichever is higher. On top of this, individual can ask for compensation. So if the data security breach that happened to you resulted in an kind of damage to the individuals have the right to ask for compensation for the damage that happened on top of whatever violation imposed by the supervisory authorities. So I hope this was kind of good background about how GDPR works, what does it mean to organizations and individuals, and what kind of changes GDPR proposed from the previous data regulation authorities. So now what kind of steps that organizations has to take in order to get ready for compliance with the GDPR? So first of all, conduct awareness training, and this is really important because you have to generate kind of awareness, and especially with the decision makers in the organizations, because you have to communicate the impact and effects of not complying with the GDPR and how this could have some kind of negativity on the business. So awareness is really, really important about the requirements of GDPR, the scope of it, how it's going to affect the business operations, and what kind of fines and penalties can be imposed on the organization in case of non-compliance. Organization needs to identify the data assets they have, because if you want to protect the personal information or personal data of the EU citizens, you really need to know where are these data stored in your environment, what kind of application access it, and what kind of individuals access it, whether internal, external, third parties. So you need to really know where are these data and how you can protect it, and what kind of controls you need to have to play in place to protect these data. Risk assessment is very important. This is not only for GDPR, but in general, if you want to have the right security controls in place, you need to conduct this risk assessment, because you need to identify what kind of weaknesses you have, what kind of threats that you might be exposed to, including compliance risk. And then you can assess the controls that you have in place and see whether those controls are sufficient or not to address those threats and risks. And based on this, you can come up with your risk profile, and then identify the action plans that you need to take to address the identified issues and risks. Establish privacy policies. So the tone from top should come by like having the management buy-in for the privacy matters. So you need to have privacy policies and has to be communicated across the organization, because privacy has to be taken seriously. As we mentioned earlier, the GDPR requires adequate security controls to be in place. However, there's no specific framework for what type of controls to be in place. So you can use existing frameworks such as ISO 27000, NIST standards for cybersecurity, and other frameworks. So these frameworks usually have matured over time, and they are used worldwide, and they really have some good controls to have in place, and will create some kind of maturity for the security in your organization, and it will be easy for you to demonstrate what kind of controls you have in place in case you are subject to an audit or in case of a data security breach. Last but not least, and probably this is the most important part, is monitor and respond. You have to keep an eye about what's going in your environment. You have to know what kind of attacks are going on, what kind of data is entering and leaving your environment, because as we mentioned earlier, you have to notify the authorities about any data breaches. So to know the data breach, you have to really monitor, and you have to be very quick in responding to those breaches. So monitoring and respond is really, really important. So now, how can Ingram Micro help you comply? So as many of you may already know, we at Ingram Micro, we address the cybersecurity and privacy matters across the people, process, and technology domains of the cybersecurity. So in the context of privacy, the service part will help you or your clients ensure continuous compliance with applicable local and international laws and regulations. The training part or the training services are very important part for achieving compliance, as it raises awareness of users about privacy requirements and equip them with the required knowledge to navigate through the data privacy and compliance challenges. Last but not least is the technology domain. This is where the solutions come into place, and the solutions provided by our security vendors can really be used to simplify and automate the process of compliance and reporting to auditing authorities. Okay, so I'm gonna finish it quick. So this is an overview of the consultancy services. So you can see at the bottom the compliance part of our consultancy services. This is where we help the organization achieve compliance, and we identify the gaps of their security postures against the local and international laws and regulations. So the training part, so we at Ingram Micro, we have 3 type of certification and training that can help you achieve compliance. So as we mentioned earlier, in some cases you need to hire data privacy officers. So we at Ingram Micro, we provide 3 types of training. So Certified Information Privacy Technology, Certified Information Privacy Manager, and Certified Information Privacy Professional. These kind of training, they address different domains, technology, operations, and law and regulations, and also they target different kind of audiences, as you see on the screen in front of you. So if you are into the law and regulations domains, you can go for the professional one. If you are into the operations, you can go for the manager certification, and if you deal with the technology and privacy by design, you can go to the technology. So the technology part is like, as we mentioned, we have some solutions as part of our security vendors portfolio which can help you basically simplify and automate the process of becoming compliant with the laws and regulations. So I've listed few of the solutions in front of you. So Symantec, they have Control Compliance Suite. HP, they have Control Point, and IBM, they have the Regulatory Compliance Analytics. if you need more information about these products and how does it help you achieve compliance, please get in touch with us and we will be more than happy to provide you with sufficient information about these products. If you have any questions, please raise this questions in the questions bar, and then by the end of the presentation we will address them. That's it for the GDPR. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over the mic to my colleague Praveen, who's going to talk about the latest security challenges in the IoT and also in the wearable technologies. Praveen?
Okay, thanks Mo, thank you so much for that, and good afternoon everybody. My name is Praveen. I am a cybersecurity consultant and trainer here at Ingram Micro, and it's really a pleasure to be given an opportunity to speak with you today. The topic that I hope to cover over the next few minutes is something that has been really exciting and really a game changer in the technology field itself. It's called the Internet of Things. It's considered to be the third industrial revolution and has been compared by many to technology revolution, such as the invention of the wheel itself, if you will. Right. So what I'm going to do over the next few minutes is, in terms of an agenda, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the Internet of Things, and then we will look at one particular subset of the Internet of Things called wearables. I'm sure the audience that is here with us today is very familiar with both these domains to varying levels of awareness, but we will be looking at these technologies and try to understand a bit more in terms of their implications. And towards the end of the session, we are going to analyze what these technologies, the IoT and wearables, have towards cybersecurity. All right, there are a couple of derivations, a couple of inferences that we've made based on the analysis, and we are going to be talking about all these over the next few minutes. So I welcome you all to this session, and I hope it's going to get you as excited as it has got me. All right, starting with the Internet of Things. So what really is the Internet of Things? Just like the cloud, which was a big hype word, you know, a couple of years back, I'd say at least 5 to 6 years ago, the word cloud was a very big hype. Not everybody understood exactly what it was, but everybody knew that this is going to be hot, so we have to be talking about it. The Internet of Things is where the cloud was 5 years ago. Everybody is talking about the IoT and everybody is saying this is where the future is headed. But what really is the Internet of Things? Right, so this is a basic definition which consolidates, which I hope consolidates everything that the IoT is all about. The words in bold are what signify the important things about the IoT. The word connected. We're talking about a connected network of components which are heterogeneous in nature. So we're talking about diverse components which are connected and online at all points in time. And here's what is unique to all, here's what is common to all these components. They have sensors. All right, the sensors are always sensing some form of data or the other. They are collecting it, transmitting it, hopefully to the cloud. And then there are engines that run in the backend to make analysis and as well as to trigger actions, responses, decisions, inferences. You name it, it's got it. So this is what the IoT is all about. So if you try to summarize everything about the IoT, we're talking about what is called intelligent automation. Right? Automation is already quite a big thing in the technology industry right now. But intelligence, a higher level of intelligence to automation is what IoT brings about. So it tries to alleviate or eradicate human intervention in a given process completely and help in the process of making decisions. So machine-to-machine communications and machine learnings and decision making without any human intervention is what the IoT is all about. The common components are about sensors, transmission of data, analytics, and then inferences, decisions, and responses. All right, so what could this mean? I'm just waiting for the slide to reflect on your screens. What could this mean? This is a simple scenario that the Internet of Things can actually generate and go in the future. Imagine there is a car accident on a road. All right, the Internet of Things provides a situation where sensors can actually automate the process of notifying emergency services. Now the question is, where are these sensors placed? In today, as we speak, in today's context, as we speak, the driver of the car can be wearing a wearable device. This particular device can sense that his heart rate is slowed down or that there is something which is wrong with his body's vital stats. And if this particular wearable device is synced with his phone, it can automate the process of calling emergency services immediately. This is something that is available today, and it is already in use in many countries around the world. In the not so distant future, I'm talking about 1 to 2 years in the future, these sensors may also be in the car. If you're talking about a self-driving car, the car can have inbuilt sensors which realize that it's been in an accident, and it automatically calls the emergency services. And of course, as you know, the car would be linked with the synced with the phone, with the mobile phone of the driver. And also a third scenario is the sensors might be present on the road itself. Okay, these sensors may be embedded on the surface of the road. They may be present in street lights. So they will detect that an accident has occurred in the vicinity, and they will automate the process of calling emergency services. So this is the kind of world that the IoT is taking us towards. And as I said earlier, it's extremely exciting and the possibilities are endless. Of course, the questions for cybersecurity and privacy are many, many and unanswered. We will be looking at them in detail as we go forward. All right, a little bit about the market for IoT in specifically in the world as well as in the Middle East region. The number of connected IoT devices is expected to be in billions. All right, each organization, I'm talking about IDC, Cisco, McKinsey, etc., has come out with various numbers in terms of the number of connected devices that we are going to be having within by the time of 2025. We are talking about 80 billion connected devices by this time period, but the market value for IoT has been predicted by McKinsey to be worth $11.1 trillion US. All right, that's not a small subject matter at all. It is an expense. It's an extremely huge amount of money that is going to be invested in this particular domain. Within the next 3 years, we are expected to have 250 million connected cars present all around the world. And this is, as you've already been seeing, there's been a lot of developments in terms of self-driving cars and connected cars, especially here in Dubai as well. And Dubai's rank in the world's smart city index, as of today, stands at 28. This is based on a ranking given by AT Kearney. London, New York, Tokyo, Hong Kong, and Paris, they take the top 5 spots. Dubai still has quite a long way to go, but it is definitely on the way. All right, when it comes to Internet of Things, the scope within which an IoT environment or an IoT ecosystem is established, it can vary. It can vary across these 3 dimensions that I mentioned over here. It can vary across an individual, or it can extend as much as a building. We're talking about home automation systems, or it can also go to the extent of a smart city which has completely integrated and connected components running it at all points in time. We will be talking about wearables a little bit more in future, which is where personal Internet of Things ecosystems are created and maintained. We will be talking about smartwatches, fitness bands, etc. Home automation systems are also in use today. There are multiple companies that sell connected home security systems. We have smart fridges which are online and connected, and they automate the process of ordering new food or new groceries as the stock gets depleted. Similarly, we have smart lighting which gets switched on the moment you're coming in, or air conditioners that get switched on 15 minutes before the time you're supposed to enter the house, so you enter into a cool room, things like this. So I'm sure you would have heard about these technologies, and these are very much available today. But talk about a smart city. These are some of the dimensions that go into a city. We're talking about governance, we're talking about reliable transport infrastructure, energy, waste management, education, healthcare, etc. How can the Internet of Things actually help in improving the condition of these aspects of a smart city? Let us try to find out. Okay, I'm just waiting for the screens, for the slides to be reflected on your screens. And we are ready. So these are some of the primary dimensions which I thought were important for a smart city. We're talking about very good governance. We're talking about environment, industries, transport, as well as living, under which we've got law enforcement, education, healthcare, etc. There are more dimensions as well, such as information and connectivity, information technology connectivity or internet connections, mobile phone networks, etc., which are not included. But these are some of the more dominant dimensions which we're talking about. Now let's look at governance. One of the important aspects of smart governance is having a unique identification number for every citizen or every resident in a particular region. And smart wristbands are actually one of the ways in which the Internet of Things can help to improve this whole process. So we're talking about smart wristbands that consolidate a citizen's access to public utilities, which can be healthcare. It consolidates his or her financial records, criminal records, if at all there are any. And government authorities have a single one-stop shop through which they can access the entire life history of a particular citizen or a resident. Now, smart wristbands are currently being used only in, let's say, public amusement parks or movie theaters. When you walk into a mall, you are given a wristband based on how much you pay. And this wristband will control your access to various areas within a mall. But the Emirates ID card is one of the cards which is actually moving in this direction. I'm sure you would be aware of it. Your Emirates ID card actually gives you full access to your patient health records when you visit a doctor. You can also link your insurance information on it. When you're entering Dubai, you can use it for accessing rapid immigration through the e-gates. Your financial history is also going to be linked with the Emirates ID card is one of the new things that I heard. So the Emirates ID card is one of the ways in which smart governance and Internet of Things is moving to is driving things in Dubai. Secondly, we're talking about environment. There are multiple dimensions to environment management in a smart city. We have to talk about waste management, water management, electricity, power generation, resources, wildlife. And I found one of the interesting things about wildlife, which is happening here in the UAE. There's a national park called Wadi Wuraya National Park, which is close to Ras Al Khaimah. Wildlife conservationists in the UAE are actually using drones, which are connected to more than 120 camera traps. So what this means is you just send a drone flying over the national park, and you can consolidate images of wildlife that have been taken by these camera traps. So this helps the wildlife conservationists avoid the trouble of having to drive all the way to these cameras. Sometimes they're located in remote areas or spread across long distances. Using a drone, a connected drone, these cameras actually send the images to the drone, and the drone brings them back over to the people who want to actually analyze them. Another sector where smart management of water is being used in the UAE is agriculture. Right? Agriculture actually consumes 75% of the water, of the annual water supply in the UAE. And techniques such as smart water management by measuring the soil moisture content near crops are actually being deployed. I've heard of a company called Aquamatics, which is working with Abu Dhabi to actually deploy this. Optimized supply of water for agriculture of crops is one of the areas where the IoT is helping us. Similarly, in industries, this is industrial Internet of Things is one of the areas where IoTs are already actioning and operational in a very big way. However, not many of us are aware of this because it doesn't touch our daily lives. But the industrial IoT is said to be worth at least $3.8 trillion US as of today, as we speak. There are multiple ways in which IoT in the industry, in an industry or a factory for that matter, helps plant managers to monitor the status of critical equipment, to be notified of any anomalies or any leaks, etc., which can prove to be detrimental to smooth operations for the day. Honeywell Pulse is one of the apps that actually plant managers can use on their mobile phones to monitor the status of critical infrastructure at any given point in time, and of course wherever they are in the world. The focus in the industrial IoT today is predominantly on the monitoring of the status of equipment and on being notified of any anomalies or any critical alerts. There haven't been any developments in terms of optimization of productions. There hasn't been any significant development in this area, but there will be real value derived from the IoT, from the industrial IoT, if it is used for optimization of productions or making more decisions based on analytical information available in the data, in the wealth of data rather. Coming over to transport, one of the other significant arteries of a successful city is, we are talking about transport. In Singapore, the Sentosa Island has actually got smart lights on a certain segment of streets. These lights monitor alert a central monitoring team in the event of a light failure. So this means the team doesn't have to keep patrolling the areas up and down and conducting periodic checks to see the status of the lights and making sure they're working well. Similarly, the process of switching them on, switching them off, everything is automated because the lights have sensors and they detect the external weather conditions, the presence of human traffic also for that particular matter, and they adjust their brightness accordingly. It's entirely automated. So there's a lot of cost savings that is being made by the authorities in Sentosa by deploying these smart lights. GPS is also being used by public transport in cities like Dubai as well as in the UK to update or notify commuters on on the timings or how long they'll have to wait for the next train or the bus. I'm sure those of you who have used the metro trains in Dubai have actually seen this. The next train is up in 2-3 minutes. You would have figured it out. It's just the use of GPS and connected Internet of Things components. Living has a number of dimensions under it. I've just picked up one, which is healthcare, but the IoT is also making a lot of changes in a lot of game-changing revolutions rather in law enforcement, in the education sector as well. I've just mentioned one specific example in Africa where a smart band-aid is actually plastered to the hands of Ebola victims, Ebola patients, and health activists are actually able to monitor their status, their vital stats from remote areas itself. So this saves them the risk of having to enter what is known as a hot zone and running the risk of infections. All right, so that was a bit about the Internet of Things. I do apologize, I'm going at a slightly rapid pace because of the paucity of time. I will be trying to cover as much as possible. Now we're going to be talking about wearables. This is one of the earliest wearable devices. This was a calculator watch which was introduced back in 1977 by HP. All right, this was back in the early days when technology was as simple as technology could get. However, things have changed significantly today. In the Middle East and Africa region alone, the wearables market is worth $0.36 billion, and it's growing consistently with a CAGR of 20.1%. Basic wearables constitute 70% approx of the entire wearables market in the Middle East, because basic wearables are what are easily and readily available to us. And when I say basic, I mean fitness bands, smartwatches, etc. Now we're going to be talking a little bit more about wearables. First of all, let's try to understand what a wearable device is. There are certain similarities and multiple differences between wearables, and the similarities is something that I'm sure all of us are familiar with. A wearable device is something that is always worn on or inside of a human body. When I said inside, I'm sure that would have raised a few eyebrows, because yes, even I was surprised when I first learned this. Wearable devices can also be carried out inside a human's body, and this is being done today. We'll talk about that over the next few minutes. And of course, a wearable device is always sensing something about the user. It can be his sleep, his diet patterns, the motion, location, etc. And it is always collecting and analyzing this data somewhere in the back end. In terms of differences, this is where things get really interesting. The functionality of the wearable device is what differentiates it. All right, it can be used for fitness tracking. This is where we have posture coaches, we have fitness trackers, fitness bands, etc. that I'm sure all of us are aware of. Posture coach, there is a simple coach called Lumo Lift. I'll talk about that over the next few minutes. Smart watches, almost every major mobile phone retailer today has the smart watch which is being sold. It is a quicker extension of your mobile phone. We'll spend a few minutes on that. Alternative reality, this is where the wearables ecosystem is actually changing and making new improvements in industries as a whole. We'll spend a few minutes on that. And of course in healthcare and gaming. All right, the fitness bands, I'm sure you would have seen this, or you would have used this, or currently are also using this at some point in time. Now this is a quick look at the type of personal data that a fitness band is always consolidating. All right, the basic models count your steps, your sleep patterns, your location, as well as your heart rate. And some more advanced models, you will have the option of feeding in your food, your diet habits as well, and most advanced models also calculate your body composition. A posture coach is a device that will actually alert you if you're slouching at your seat or maintaining bad body posture. So information on how you sit, how often you sit, how you stand, etc. is being collected by these posture coaches. This one here is a picture of a coach called Lumo Lift. You can Google it if you're interested in it. Smart watches, on the other hand, I'm sure all of us have seen this also at some point. These are devices that collect information pertaining to your fitness and your health in general, which refers to your sleep, your location, heart rate, etc. And also, smart watches are synced with your phone, so we have no idea to what extent it has access to your phone information as well. Alternative reality. I'm sure all of us have heard about this, but what really is it? VR as well as augmented reality. All right. These are two dimensions to alternative reality, and many of us have definitely heard of virtual reality, but how different is it from augmented reality? The difference really lies in your glasses. A VR headset is completely opaque. It takes you to a completely new dimension which is separated from your physical surroundings. So the glasses are actually opaque, and you would have figured that, right? But an augmented reality setup actually adds on, or it builds onto your current physical surroundings. So the glasses, as you can clearly see, I've taken a picture of Microsoft HoloLens here. They are not opaque, they are clear. So what augmented reality does is it builds on top of your environment. If you remember the Pokemon game, that is one of the best examples of augmented reality. Now, where is alternative reality actually being used? In industries, there's a lot of applications for augmented reality that are being tapped into. For example, medical training. When a new surgeon is to be is starting out fresh, right? In terms of training, currently surgeons are trained by observing more experienced surgeons when they are in action, or based on cadavers. But this is not the best way to train a surgeon. Right, so there are companies that are bringing out augmented reality tools using which surgeons can practice, critical operations or things like that, which really need hands-on experience. Similarly, in construction, we have now think about it. When you're trying to build a new building, you have to look at floor plans. No matter how three-dimensional today's modeling systems and software are, at the end of the day, when people are on the ground and building, let's say, a wall, they have to go back to the floor plans, and these are two-dimensional blueprints. Think about it when someone is wearing an augmented reality or an alternative reality headset, using which the floor plan actually draws itself in front of him in 3 dimensions. That will lead to quicker construction times and a lot of savings for a construction company. A company called Bentley Systems is actually helping construction companies achieve this dream. It has brought out alternative reality tools that are helping to speed up the whole process of construction by incorporating these headsets. Similarly, in the auto sector, we have BMW bringing in wearable devices through which a driver can actually be warned of an incoming obstacle, or if he's going too fast. Buildings on the side of the road, they get named or they get highlighted, etc. If he's going to a particular destination, there is navigation guidance for him. So there's a lot of new and exciting developments that are happening in terms of alternative reality. And this particular slide just gives you some insight on this. In the healthcare sector, we are talking about ingestibles, and there's also something else called implantables. Now, I said earlier, there are wearable devices that can be worn also or carried on inside of a human being's body, and this is one of the best examples. A company called Proteus has brought out ingestible tablets, which are digital pills, rather, if you've heard of them. They are particularly useful for patients who have memory loss problems, dementia, Alzheimer's, etc. They have to be consumed by the patient, and from within the body, they monitor the patient's vital statistics and also his or her reaction to specific drugs, dosages, etc. And also, in addition to that, if the patient is actually complying with the prescribed medication plan, or if he or she has forgotten to take tablets, etc. All right, so these pills can be synced with a mobile app through which the doctor or the nurses can be notified no matter where they are in the world. So this is the direction in which wearable devices are taking us today. And as I said earlier, it has never been more exciting than it is today. All right, we've come to the last part of this session. We're talking about security in the Internet of Things. Now, this is where a number of questions have to be answered, and to get there, we'll have to look at the state of IT today. We have 3 predominant sectors in terms of technology, which is mainstream, emergent, as well as upcoming. When I say mainstream, I'm referring to social media, I'm referring to mobile, cloud, as well as analytics, and these are technologies that we take for granted today. We are comfortable with posting our information on social media, with sharing it on our mobile phones. We don't mind if phones track our location and whether there is sufficient light in the room or whether the phone is held too close to us or too far away. We don't mind so much in terms of what level of access a phone has to our daily lives. On the emergent sector, we have technologies like the Internet of Things, we have wearable devices, drones, 3D printing, self-driving cars, and this is where our trust of technology is being taken to the next level. And at the last end of the spectrum, we're talking about upcoming technologies, which is the brain computing interface as well as flying cars, right? So Dubai is already investing in flying cars and plans to have these up and running, or up and flying, I'd say, within the next few years itself. The brain computing interface is a digital interface between a human being's brain and the digital world. Okay, Elon Musk is actually making some investments, a company called Neuralink, towards this direction. Now, so what this means is we are comfortable with posting our personal information, financial data, communication data, and also our biometrics on, submitting it to technology. But the direction in which we are moving, if you look at the emergent sector as well as the upcoming sectors, it looks like we are going to be trusting our human life with technology. So what this means is, for information security, we will have to shift from the traditional confidentiality, integrity, and availability triad towards protection of human life itself, because As we trust our lives with technology, with information technology for that matter, the focus of InfoSec will lie on protecting human life itself. So with that in mind, we have come up with three particular sectors for security in the Internet of Things. We say that it has to be inherent, it has to be holistic, and it has to be measurable. So what do I mean by inherent? I'm talking about security by design. And when I say holistic, I'm talking about security across all the components and all the layers of the OSI model or whatever model is being used, and also the physical domain. When I talk about measurable security, we are talking about universal standards. And this is something that is really lacking in today's context. Security standards for the IoT, we don't really have something that has been approved and has been published worldwide. Now let's look at the case of a self-driving car and try to understand each of these dimensions. We are talking about security being inherent, holistic, as well as measurable. How do we achieve these in the case of a self-driving car? Inherent security. What I mean by inherent security is basically that security has to be built in by design into the Internet of Things itself. Into every component in the IoT, security has to be available as a design component. So what this means is, first of all, security over functionality, secure application development standards, principles of least privileges, need to know, etc., and input validation. So when I say security over functionality, security by default has to be ingrained in the design phase, the operations phase, the maintenance phase, as well as the end of life phase itself of all the components that go into the IoT. A simple example is default deny all, which is still not being applied by many organizations in their traditional technology ecosystems, but this has to be a mandate in the IoT environment itself. Similarly, secure application development standards. A single autonomous car, if you look at it, has thousands, if not millions of applications and their APIs which support its operations. Secure coding practices have to be built into these applications. So for example, I'm talking about formal coding methodologies, code review processes, application vulnerability assessments, and pen testing to make sure that these apps are actually robust in terms of the security posture. Similarly, principles of least privileges and need to know. Let's take an autonomous car. It consists of multiple what are known as electronic control units or ECUs. If a single ECU is compromised by a malicious hacker, this allows him to talk to other ECUs as well and to take control of the whole car eventually. And this is how real-world hacks of connected cars are being carried out today. Now, if you apply the principles of least privileges and need to know to the way in which the ECUs communicate with each other, it will not be so easy for an attacker to actually carry this out. So these basic principles, which are not alien to security professionals today, have to be incorporated into the components, the way in which the ECUs talk to each other, and of course in the way in which the applications also communicate. Lastly, input validation. Again, this is not a new concept at all, but it has to be built into the design of a self-driving car, because malware can be sent to cars to exploit vulnerabilities and try to carry out attacks such as buffer overflow and injection attacks, etc., which we are all familiar with. But proper and defined input validation methodologies help to protect against this form of an attack. Holistic security. The holistic is the second part of the pie which I spoke about. We are talking about security which is all encompassing. All right. Now the main thing, if you look at the definition of the Internet of Things, is it is a universe of heterogeneous components. We have multiple things which are each carrying their own unique pros and cons into the ecosystem. Each new thing or each new component is a different attack surface. Multiple things from different vendors are all going into a single autonomous car, and they all bring in different levels of security. All right, so it is actually up to the makers of autonomous cars to try to build a universal set of standards, which we'll talk about in the next slide, for these things to make sure they're all uniformly secure. Interoperability, they can talk to each other in a uniform and a secure way, and security metrics can be defined for these as well. OWASP has actually come out with a top 10 for the Internet of Things and recommends a holistic approach which looks at a multiple set of components. It starts from the device going all the way up to physical security. You can look up more on this if you want to find out about OWASP top 10 for the Internet of Things. Lastly, we are going to be looking at measurable security. As I said earlier, we still don't have a universally accepted set of security standards for the Internet of Things. There are activities happening in silos, but a universally accepted set of standards is definitely not available as of today. This will really go a great way in terms of defining the security metrics for the Internet of Things. That would be a good place to start. But to be honest today, in terms of the complexity, people are really at a loss in terms of where do we start securing things. All right, similarly, the other component of metrics would be comparability and repeatability. So let's say we have a self-driving car from manufacturer A and another one from B. how do you compare the security posture or the security levels, risk levels that these two cars, propose? Security metrics will actually help us to do this, and similarly in terms of repeatability as well. So these are some of the key areas, namely inherent security, measurable security, as well as holistic security that have to be built into securing the Internet of Things. The last part that I wanted to talk about, which my colleague Mo has already covered, is about privacy. All right, now on the left side, you look at the social mobile analytics and cloud, as well as some of the emerging technologies, self-driving cars, etc., wearables. This is some of our personal data, your physical location, the speed at which you're traveling, your body composition, etc., which gets fed into these devices. All right, we trust them with them. How do you answer these questions which I'm raising right here? Who's the owner of the PII of a user? Who's the data owner? Who's the data controller? Who approves the sharing of this data with third parties? The right to be forgotten, which Mo has already discussed about. How do you ensure that the user is notified on time in case there is a breach? All right, these privacy questions also remain unanswered, and security and privacy in the Internet of Things still have quite a lot of questions to be answered. So I hope this session was useful. I'm done with my slides. The intent was primarily, as I said, to incite thought on the security challenges proposed by these two technologies, the Internet of Things as well as wearables. I will now hand it over to Mark.
Okay, so thank you very much, Praveen. Thanks a lot, Muawiyah. So it took us a bit more than an hour to finish this webinar, but I hope that it was useful for everybody. So we have here some questions, and we are going to try to answer to them. We answered already in the chat bar for some of them. So we have a question from Aisha for Muawiyah. Under GDPR section, please do let me know how can organization in the UAE select a supervisory authority, or is it not applicable in the UAE? So Muawiyah, can you please answer?
Okay, so for supervisory authority selection, okay, you can pick any of the authorities that across the EU countries. You have the right to select anyone you feel like. If you are in UAE, if you remember, we discussed yesterday about this. So the EU does not have really jurisdictions in UAE, but like if you are processing any of the data of EU citizens, you can really select any supervisory authority you want, and then you can deal with them directly. Yeah. So really, this goes back to the scope of the GDPR. It doesn't matter if you are in EU or outside. You can really just comply with the requirements and report any security breaches if you are holding or processing any of the EU citizens' data. Yeah.
Okay, so I hope it answered your question, Aisha. If there is any question, please drop it on the chat bar. And I see that Aisha is asking another question. Which are the other products offering related to security compliance other than Symantec and HP?
Yeah. So we have many security products, to be honest, but due to the limitation in time, I didn't have really time to put all of them. I just put samples from HP, Symantec, and IBM. I think Trend Micro has also one solution, and other vendors might also have one solution. If you want more details, could you please just contact me, and I'll provide you the full list of those vendors and their solutions as well. Thanks.
Okay, so in the meantime, I didn't see coming any other questions. So if there is no other question, I think we can stop here. In any case, this session has been recorded and will be broadcasted to all of you, so you can also use it with your colleagues and clients. And we have. So I would like to remind you that we are present next week in Dubai in the JISEC with a quite large booth, several number of vendors. And if you wish a dedicated activity with your clients, don't hesitate to take contact with us. We can dedicate several topics, several activity with you, especially that we have also a VIP conference session with we are doing ourselves. This Muawiyah and Praveen are going to give this session again next week, as well as our executives. We have also Alien Vault, SIM provider, who is going to have a full day session as well. So if you are interested in all these activities and you would like to know more, just contact us and we will be delighted to share with you these activities and dedicate the time for you and your clients. I hope you enjoyed this webinar. Next point will be also the newsletter that you're hopefully going to receive beginning of next week, if not tomorrow. We are working hard to make it happen. And the next webinar is going to be in beginning of June, so first week of June, and it's going to be related to sales topic, how to sell cybersecurity, how to position cybersecurity. So we will give you in advance the agenda so you can participate in that and share it with your colleagues and partner and clients. Thank you very much again for participating, and we look forward to have you during our next activities. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. Stop recording.